The hermit rancher had buried his hope 15 years ago, until 6 desperate women appeared at his door with impossible knowledge of his past. Thomas Whitmore squinted through the afternoon heat at the 6 figures approaching his isolated homestead. Apache women, their faces marked with ceremonial white clay, riding hard-traveled horses across his barren land. In 15 years of solitude, no one had visited his remote canyon ranch voluntarily. "We seek Thomas Whitmore," called the leader as they halted before his weathered porch. Her English carried no trace of uncertainty. "We come to offer marriage." Thomas nearly dropped the rifle he'd instinctively grabbed. 6 women, ranging from barely 20 to perhaps 35, sat their horses with desperate dignity. Their traditional dress was travel-worn, their jewelry hastily gathered, but their eyes burned with fierce determination. "You're making some kind of mistake," Thomas said, backing toward his door. "I don't know you people." "You are the man who carves small wooden animals," the leader continued, dismounting with fluid grace. "The man who lost a wife named Rebecca and 3 children who never drew breath. The man who speaks to grave markers every morning like they might answer." Thomas's blood turned to ice water. No living person knew those details. He'd made certain of that through years of careful isolation. The wooden animals, he'd burned them all after Rebecca died. The graves, he'd marked them with simple stones, no names, no dates. And his morning conversations with the dead were conducted in whispers that couldn't carry beyond his own ears. "How could you possibly," he began, but stopped when the woman reached into her leather pouch and withdrew something that made his knees buckle. A small wooden rabbit, no bigger than his thumb, carved with the same careful hands that had crafted dozens of similar toys during Rebecca's difficult pregnancies. He had burned every piece he'd made, watching them turn to ash as fever consumed his wife. Yet here one sat, impossible as snow in summer, in the palm of a stranger. "Where did you find that?" His voice cracked from disuse and shock. "From the medicine woman who tended your wife," the Apache woman replied. "Bright Feather kept this hidden for 15 years, waiting for the right moment to return it. She died 4 days ago, but not before telling us where to find the gray-eyed rancher who carved hope into wood." Thomas staggered against his doorframe. Bright Feather. He'd forgotten that name, pushed it from memory along with everything else from those terrible months. But he remembered now, the old Apache woman who had come when no white doctor would travel so far for so little payment. The one who had brought herbs and knowledge, who had tried desperately to save Rebecca and the babies when conventional medicine failed. "Bright Feather said you would help us," the woman continued, "because you understand what it means to lose everything to circumstances beyond your control." Thomas looked at each woman carefully for the first time. Beneath the ritual face paint, he saw exhaustion mixed with unwavering resolve. These weren't fortune seekers or confidence tricksters. They were refugees fleeing something terrible enough to drive them to this desperate gambit. "I'm Ayana," the leader said, introducing herself with formal gravity. "These are my companions, Nazcha Arenda, Tallulah, Kiona, and Zora. We were promised to men we cannot accept. When we refused, our families declared us dead." She gestured to the white clay marking their faces. "This paint marks our death to our people. We cannot return. We cannot survive alone in these territories." One of the younger women, barely out of girlhood, stepped forward. "I am Kiona. The man chosen for me has buried 4 wives already. Each died in childbirth or from his fists. I would rather face death than guarantee it." Thomas studied their faces, seeing desperation tempered by dignity. Whatever drove them to his door had been worse than exile, worse than seeking marriage with a complete stranger. Why marriage, he asked. Why not just hide until the danger passes? Because territorial law recognizes marriages between Apache women and white settlers, Ayanna explained. Once we are legally your wives, taking us becomes an act of war between peoples. Our families cannot touch us without risking larger conflict. The irony struck Thomas like a physical blow. Laws designed to prevent conflicts over stolen Indian women would now protect Indian women from their own people. And what happens after? He asked. 6 wives sharing one small cabin, one piece of land. Apache women no cooperation, said the one called Nasja, her scarred hand speaking of hard work and harder choices. We build our own shelter, grow our own food, contribute our own skills. We ask only for protection under your name and the right to remain on your land. Before Thomas could respond, Ayanna pointed toward the distant mountains where dust clouds marked approaching riders. Our family sent warriors to retrieve us. They will arrive before sunset. Thomas shaded his eyes, counting the figures. 10 riders, moving with military precision. Armed men who wouldn't be interested in negotiation. If they find us unmarried, they will drag us back to face punishment for our rebellion. Ayanna continued. But if we belong to a white man under territorial law, they cannot touch us without risking war. And if I refuse? Thomas asked, though the set of their shoulders already told him the answer. Ayanna's hand moved to the knife at her belt. Then we make our stand here and die on your land rather than live as slaves. Either way, we do not return. The dust clouds grew larger, individual horses becoming visible against the orange sky. Thomas calculated time and distance. 20 minutes, perhaps 30, before the pursuit arrived. There's no preacher, Thomas said, grasping for practical objections to an impossible situation. No legal witnesses. Territorial law allows emergency declarations of marriage, Ayanna replied, witnessed by the involved parties and recorded later. We need only your spoken agreement before they arrive. Thomas looked at the 6 women, really seeing them for the first time. Beneath their desperation, he recognized something that made his chest tighten with painful memory. They stood like Rebecca used to stand when facing impossible choices, back straight, chins raised, ready to bear whatever weight the world demanded. The approaching riders were close enough now that individual voices carried on the wind. Angry voices, speaking in rapid Apache about shame and duty and the necessity of bringing the women home. What are your names again? Thomas asked quietly. Each woman stepped forward in turn. Ayanna, Nasja, Arenda, Tallulah, Kiona, Zora. Their names fell like stones into still water, each creating ripples that would reshape everything that followed. Thomas thought of the 15 years he'd spent talking to gravestones, carving animals he would never give away, living like a man already dead. These women offered him something he'd forgotten existed, a reason to face tomorrow. The lead rider reached the edge of his property, close enough for Thomas to see war paint streaked across young features twisted by rage. The warrior raised his rifle, not quite aiming, but making his intentions unmistakably clear. I, Thomas Whitmore, take you as my wives under territorial law, Thomas declared, his voice growing stronger with each word. I pledge to protect and provide for you, to stand with you against all who would do you harm. The women spoke in unison, their voices carrying across the yard like a battle cry, We accept your protection and offer ours in return." The young warrior who had led the pursuit dismounted at the edge of the yard, his rifle trained on Thomas. "White man," he shouted in heavily accented English, "you harbor our women. Return them or face the consequences." Thomas stepped forward, placing himself between the warriors and his new wives. For the first time in 15 years, he felt like the man Rebecca had married, someone willing to fight for what mattered. "These women are my wives under territorial law," Thomas called back. "They are under my protection now." The warrior's face darkened with fury. He spoke rapidly to his companions in Apache, and Thomas saw hands moving toward weapons. But then something unexpected happened. The warrior's eyes fixed on the silver pendant at Ayana's throat, and his expression shifted from rage to something approaching awe. "That belongs to Bright Feather," the young man said, his voice losing its commanding edge. "She was medicine woman to our people. She died 4 suns ago." Ayana's hand moved protectively to the necklace. "She gave it to us, said it would guide us to safety." The warrior studied Thomas with new attention. Bright Feather spoke of a white woman who died bringing forth children. Said this woman's spirit was restless, that she had unfinished work. He paused. "You are the husband she mentioned." Thomas felt understanding dawn with devastating clarity. Bright Feather knew Rebecca. She tried to save her. Bright Feather carried guilt for 15 winters, the warrior explained. Said she failed to save your woman and children. She told us these women would come to you because you would understand their need. Behind the warrior, an older man with ritual scars across his weathered face spoke sharply in Apache. The young leader responded with equal force, and Thomas caught enough words to understand they were arguing about whether to honor a dead medicine woman's wishes or enforce tribal law. "My uncle says Bright Feather was old and confused," the warrior translated. "He says these women belong to their families, not to dead medicine women or white ranchers." His hand tightened on his rifle. He wants to settle this matter with blood. Thomas stepped closer to the mounted warriors. "Then he'll have to kill me first. These women asked for my protection, and I gave my word." The scarred uncle raised his weapon, but the young warrior grabbed the barrel and forced it down. They argued in rapid Apache, voices rising with each exchange. They debate whether Bright Feather's final wish carries more weight than tribal custom. Ayana translated quietly. "The young one is her grandson. He believes we should be allowed to choose our path." The argument intensified, the uncle's voice growing more aggressive. But then the young warrior did something that surprised everyone. He dismounted and walked toward the stone markers that indicated Rebecca's grave. The warrior knelt beside the simple grave and placed his hand on the weathered stone. When he looked up, his eyes reflected deep emotion. "Bright Feather came here every month for 15 years, he said, his voice carrying clearly across the yard. She brought flowers, cleaned the stones, spoke to the dead woman in both languages. He stood slowly. She said this white woman died trying to give life, and that made her sacred to our people." Thomas felt his throat close with emotion. All those times he'd found fresh wildflowers on Rebecca's grave, assuming they'd blown there by chance. All those mornings when the stone seemed cleaner than he'd left it. An Apache medicine woman had been honoring his wife's memory while he wallowed in guilt. Bright Feather said she learned much from watching your woman fight for her unborn children, the warrior continued. Said it taught her that some spirits burn too bright to be contained by one lifetime of sorrow. The scarred uncle spat on the ground and spoke harshly, but the young warrior responded with calm authority. that silenced the older man. "My uncle says the dead are dead and should not concern the living," the warrior translated. "But I am war chief now, and bright feathers' wisdom guided our people for 60 winters. Her final wishes will be honored." He turned to address his companions in Apache with a voice that brooked no argument. One by one, the other warriors lowered their weapons. The uncle argued once more, his voice rising to a shout, but the war chief cut him off with a sharp gesture. "These women chose exile over forced marriage," the war chief announced. "Bright Feather said such courage should be protected, not punished. They are no longer our responsibility." The uncle wheeled his horse around and rode away without another word, 2 others following. The remaining warriors stayed with their leader. "What happens now?" Thomas asked. "Now you learn what it means to have 6 Apache wives," the war chief said with the first smile Thomas had seen from him. "They will work you harder than any white woman ever could." Behind Thomas, Nasja laughed softly. "He speaks truth. We are not gentle wives who sit quietly by the fire." The war chief gathered his reins. "I am Joseph Crowfeather. I will send word to territorial officials about these marriages, making them legal in both our laws." He paused, looking once more at Rebecca's grave. "Bright Feather said the white woman's spirit would rest easier knowing her husband was no longer alone." As the warriors departed, Thomas found himself standing in his yard with 6 women who were now legally his wives, wondering how his solitary existence had transformed so completely in the span of a single afternoon. The silence following the rider's departure felt heavier than the years of solitude Thomas had grown accustomed to. 6 women stood in his yard, their few possessions still secured to their horses, studying the small cabin that had housed only 1 man for 15 years. "We cannot all shelter there," Ayanna said practically. "We will need additional buildings before winter." Thomas nodded, grateful for her directness. "There's lumber in the barn, tools too. The land is suitable for construction." He paused, still adjusting to the reality of addressing his wives. "Do you know building techniques?" Tallulah, who had remained quiet during the confrontation, smiled for the first time since their arrival. "Apache women learn skills your white women do not. We can build, hunt, preserve food, tend livestock. We are not ornaments." Over the following hours, Thomas watched in amazement as the women transformed his property with efficient organization. They assessed every resource, planned living arrangements, and began preparing for permanent settlement. Orenda and Kiona examined his vegetable garden with knowing eyes, discussing improvements in rapid Apache. Nasja and Zora evaluated his small cattle herd, pointing out animals needing attention. "Your bull is past his prime," Nasja informed him bluntly. "He cannot properly service all the cows. You need younger breeding stock." Thomas found himself laughing, actually laughing, for the first time in years. "You've been here 4 hours, and you're already rebuilding my entire ranch." "That is what wives do," Ayanna said matter-of-factly. "We improve life, not merely maintain it." As evening approached, practical questions became more personal. They gathered around the fire pit the women had enhanced with stones from a creek, sharing a meal somehow prepared from his meager supplies. "How does this arrangement function?" Thomas asked finally. 6 wives, 1 husband. I don't understand the expectations." The women exchanged glances before Orenda spoke. "We are not 6 separate wives competing for your attention. We are one family with different strengths. Some of us may bear children if we choose," Ayanna added. "Others will focus on different contributions." We share duties, responsibilities, and the burden of survival. Apache women understand that cooperation strengthens families more than competition. Tallulah continued. Thomas studied the faces illuminated by firelight. Each woman was distinct. Ayana's natural leadership, Orenda's quiet wisdom, Nazca's practical knowledge, Tallulah's gentle strength, Kiona's fierce independence, and Zora's quick intelligence. Together, they formed something he hadn't experienced since childhood, a genuine family. "What about affection?" he asked quietly. The question hung in the air like smoke from the fire. Finally, Ayana answered with characteristic honesty. "Love develops in many forms. We do not expect you to care for us all equally or identically, but we offer respect, partnership, and the opportunity to build something meaningful together." She paused, her eyes reflecting the flames. After 15 years of grieving, perhaps that provides sufficient foundation. As the women settled into the cabin for their first night, arranging sleeping spaces with quiet efficiency, Thomas found himself looking toward Rebecca's grave. For the first time since her death, he felt something other than guilt when thinking of her. 6 months later, Thomas stood in the doorway of the main cabin, observing his wives working in the expanded garden that now fed 13 people comfortably. The property had been transformed beyond recognition. 4 additional structures housed different aspects of their shared life: sleeping quarters, workshop space, storage for their increased livestock, and a communal kitchen. Ayana approached, her belly rounded with the child she carried, the first of what would likely be many. She had chosen motherhood, while Tallulah and Zora focused on crafts they sold in the territorial capital, and Nazca managed their growing herd with skills that made neighboring ranchers envious. "Joseph Crow Feather visits today," Ayana informed him. "He brings news from the territorial office." The war chief had become a regular visitor, bridging the gap between their unusual family and both white and Apache communities. His presence legitimized their arrangement and helped others understand that this union served everyone's interests. When Joseph arrived, he carried official documents that made Thomas smile genuinely. "The territorial governor has recognized your marriages as legal precedent," Joseph announced. "Other Apache women facing similar circumstances now have this option." Thomas nodded, understanding the broader significance. Their personal solution had become a pathway for others caught between changing worlds. "How do your neighbors accept this arrangement?" Joseph asked, gesturing toward the bustling property. "Better than anticipated," Thomas replied honestly. "The ranch produces more food than ever before. We trade fairly with everyone. Results speak louder than unusual circumstances." That evening, following their established custom, the family gathered at Rebecca's grave for their evening meal. The women had embraced this ritual, understanding that honoring Thomas's first wife honored the foundation of their current happiness. Thomas placed fresh flowers on the stone marker, flowers grown in the garden his Apache wives had expanded. "Rebecca," he said softly, "Bright Feather was correct. You would have appreciated them. They work as diligently as you did, fight for what matters as fiercely as you fought." Orenda, now visibly pregnant with her first child, smiled at him. She would be proud of the man you have become again. And it was true. The hollow, guilt-ridden hermit who had lived alone for 15 years was gone. In his place stood a man with purpose, responsibility, and hope for the future. 6 women had asked him to marry them all, and in accepting, he had discovered not just companionship, but resurrection. The ranch thrived under multiple capable hands. children would soon play in yards where silence had reigned for years. The sound of conversation and laughter echoed off buildings that had known only solitude. Thomas looked around at his expanded family, wives, expected children, and the community they had built together, and realized that sometimes the most impossible requests lead to the most extraordinary transformations. The old rancher who had lived alone was gone forever, replaced by a man surrounded by life, purpose, and love in forms he never could have imagined. As the sun set over the mountains, painting the sky in brilliant shades of gold and crimson, Thomas Whitmore knew, with absolute certainty, that he had found his way home. The most unlikely salvation had arrived at his door in the form of 6 desperate women who had somehow known exactly what both they and he needed to survive and thrive in an unforgiving world.